Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome today to the InnovaBuzz podcast from Miami in Florida, the USA, of course, Jody Glidden, who's the founder and CEO of Introhive. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Jody. It's a real privilege to have you here as my guest.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Introhive is an AI-powered software as a service platform that helps companies improve their sales by making sense of huge amounts of data that they've got in all kinds of different places and then understanding the relationships that that data actually represents. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that in some more detail, and particularly the relationships aspects of that, because I think a lot of software that's around, people kind of use it to forget about building the relationships, but yours is actually placing the relationships at the center. So really excited to learn more about that. Before we get onto that though, Jody, what's the impact you're making in the world today?
We've been really shocked at the reaction of the market with this software. We've signed a lot of very, very large companies in very, very large deployments. Companies like PwC and Deloitte and KPMG and banks and a bunch of others. So it's been a pretty big impact, much bigger than we had expected from the outset, but really exciting.
Yeah. Did you imagine, or was that your target audience when you set out on the journey with Introhive?
Originally, we didn't really know, who the best target was going to be, but we wanted to get out there and experiment. So we started talking with some of the former customers that I had from my previous technology company. And so one of the first doors we knocked on was PwC, because they were a happy customer of my former company. We leveraged relationships, So they kind of helped shape a lot of our ideas and come up with a lot of really great places that we could go next with the idea. So, one of the things about PwC is they're very, very influential. A lot of people sort of watch what they do and follow what they do. They're kind of like leaders, not just in the global systems integrator space, but across, large companies in general and so on, because they have 250,000 people, more than that, actually. So what it ended up doing is, we started having a lot of other global systems integrators signing on board. We had a lot of law firms signing on board, a lot of partnerships in general, accounting firms, all sorts of other firms. And now it's just kind of grown across every industry.
All right. Well, give us a bit of a snapshot of what Introhive does, what it's used for, so that we can get a sense of how to take this discussion further.
Yeah, sure. So essentially what the original idea was, we found that people were sending out company-wide emails saying, hey, does anybody know anybody at, Coca-Cola or Apple or whatever? Because we need to find some executive or something in order to find our way in. And obviously very inefficient, but gave us the idea behind that, which was, if people could really look at all of the emails that are being sent and received and the meetings that are being scheduled from their employees to the outside world and all of the different phone conversations that are being had and everything else that's moved into Slack and Teams and all these other sorts of things. There's just an amazing amount of data and an amazing amount of really high value problems that you could solve for customers. So, figuring out who knows who and how well they know them is one of those great problem solvers. But we've moved into so many other high value use cases now. So for one good example is, if you're the CEO of a big company, you're probably getting 80% of your revenue from 20% of your customers, or maybe even 10% of your customers. And yet you really don't know if those 10 or 20% of your customers are being treated well or ignored. So, we have now systems that can alert the customers to tell them, alert the executives to let them know, that a really important customer is being ignored. And we have, other use cases that can help people with cross-selling across their various customers, or upselling their various customers, retaining their customers, all sorts of different, high-level use cases, making it so that they don't have to enter a bunch of information in their CRM, which used to take sales reps about 20% of their time. So it's just moved, into so many areas because we've been around a dozen years now.
Yeah, and that last example you gave, I remember in my corporate world when we put in the CRM, everybody was saying, "Oh, this CRM is useless," and I was one of the people that pointed out, "Well, it's useless because nobody's putting in the data. It's, if there's no data in there, then of course it's useless. So you've got to put in the data." And as you say, the salespeople, because it was taking them so much time to put in the data, and they just didn't see the value in it for themselves, and so they didn't do it, and so therefore there was no benefit to be gained by it.
I remember speaking to a very large, one of the global systems integrators one time, and they said, we have two types of people in this company. We have the people who diligently put all of the data into the CRM, and that's a problem because they're spending 20% of their time doing it. And then we have another kind of problem, which is the people who don't put it in, and that's a problem. So, either one is not great, but automating it is good.
Excellent. Well, one of the things I really liked there that you mentioned, and I think that's probably what attracted me to our conversation, is the focusing on the relationships, and in particular that concept of focusing on existing clients, where I know as a consumer that this always frustrates me when I've been a long-time client of a company, and it's really clear that they treat their long-time clients more poorly than they do new clients, because their whole focus is on winning new business. And I think the idea of making sure that you're actually keeping that relationship vibrant and alive with those existing customers that form that big part of your business. And often they might be happy, so there's no cause for them to contact the vendor because everything's running smoothly. But of course, it's at the moment something goes wrong, if there's not those ongoing communications, those strong relationships, then that becomes a much bigger problem than perhaps it could be if there were those ongoing communication channels. So talk to us a little bit more about that part of Introhive and why that's so important.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that come to mind when you say that. So for one thing, we always at Introhive, and I think in the SaaS world in general, software as a service world in general, we always think that it should be completely flipped in the reverse. So first of all, you have your the retention of your existing customers is number one, right? Because it's a lot easier to save a customer than to win a new one.
Yeah.
The upsell of existing customers is kind of number two, because like you look in a recessionary environment like this, and it's very, very difficult to reach new customers. So it's not a good idea to be spending 90% of your energy chasing new customers when you have happy customers right now that probably are also in the one of the most able to give you referrals to other new customers. And a lot of people kind of flip the whole thing the other way. Like you say, they spend all their time chasing new business, not a lot of time focusing on their existing upsells, and not a lot of time focusing on proactively making sure that people aren't churning. So I think that's just, a really important thing to keep in mind, is that your existing customers really matter.
Yeah. And you mentioned the current climate, and I think there's challenges for everybody in the current climate, and existing customers, certainly customers who have vendors that are reaching out to them and saying, well, is there something we can help with in this existing client because it's so difficult? Is there a particular issue that's coming up for you because of the economic climate that we're in, and how can we help, rather than, as you say, focusing all their energy on chasing a new business, which has a very low probability of success, particularly in this climate, and risking losing business on the other hand because they're not spending enough time nurturing that relationship.
Yeah, and the other thing that's happened in the last couple of years, as you know, is people are changing jobs way more frequently than they used to. So they talk about the Great Resignation, or they talk about the Great Reshuffle. It's been given a lot of different names, but the fact is, employee retention is not nearly what it used to be, and So, if you're really cultivating those existing relationships that you have, when those people change jobs and they go to the next company, that's a potential new customer for you. And the other thing is that if you are paying attention to more than just one person at each of your important accounts, then when that person goes and leaves your company, you have resiliency in the account. It's sort of, built in that your account is going to be a lot more safe. So I think for all of these things, we need to be treating this a bit like a science now. We need to be using the data, because if you're not using the data, your competitor is, and they just have such an advantage over you on retention, on upsell, and on new sell.
Yeah, that's a really important point. You certainly prompted something there, and I wonder if you could give us an example or a kind of a case study of this. And it's when I was in the corporate world, the setup was that we had an account manager who was essentially a senior salesperson who owned the particular account, and they had almost absolute control over who saw people at that particular customer. And some of those account managers did this really well. They involved the CEO, they involved the technical people, they involved the marketing people, they involved the manufacturing supply chain people where necessary, and they connected them with different people at the customer organization so that there were that network of relationships. But others saw it as, I own this customer, so they acted as almost a barrier to anyone else in the organization from our company building relationships with the customer company. And the only place where those relationships then were built, and of course this didn't happen that often, was at conventions or so on, where you'd by chance meet those people and say, oh yeah, you work for so-and-so, you're a customer of ours, and then you might start a relationship there. Talk to us a little bit about how Introhive kind of helps those people that are doing it well and perhaps rescues those people that are not doing it well.
Well, one thing is it brings transparency. So anytime you have transparency in an organization, you get a pretty big benefit, right? Because we used to see this a lot in law firms. So a partner at a law firm would sort of be like, these are my contacts and I'm going to hold on to them. But, maybe they're in the litigation department of the law firm, but there's also, an IP department and a whole bunch of other departments that could be doing business if somebody wasn't sort of claiming ownership. But we see this in every industry now where people do that. The nice thing with this is it brings more transparency and openness, which now that, that same person who used to be protective is now finding that they're getting business just flowing in from all the other relationships that they didn't know about. And it creates this environment where it's not one department trying to win against another department. It's one company, one team, realizing that they're competing against other companies, other teams. So if they're all playing as individual players, you're just not going to win.
Yeah. And I guess particularly with email, if there's direct communication from a person within the supplier company to the customer company, that then is captured by the system, and so everybody can see that communication.
Yeah, that's right. And it'll not only tell you like that it happened, but it will tell you who likely knows them best. So that kind of that's another thing too. You'd have these people that say, I met them first, or things like that. And really, that's not what the goal is, right? It's sometimes 25 people might know Tim Cook at Apple, but who actually knows them best? That's really the important things, and that's how you get business done.
Yeah, and then leveraging those relationships.
That's right.
So how long has Introhive been going? Because I'm fascinated about your growth story as well.
Yeah. We're one of those 10-year overnight success stories where nothing happened. So we've been about 12 years. For about 3 or 4 years, we sold zero, and then it just took right off. So what happened was we thought that the idea would take maybe a year to build, and it just took so much longer than that to get the original version, because we were getting so much client feedback as we were, putting it in their hands, and they were, giving us better ideas and better way, feedback on the data and feedback on our algorithms and tuning the scoring and everything. And then finally, when we got it dialed in, everything really took off. And we've had really strong growth for every year since. So really exciting. This is the fourth, I'd call it startup, but we're much bigger than a startup at this point. Yeah. We're almost 400 people, but it's been, I've had every tech company I've ever started, we led to a successful exit, but this is by far the largest one that I've ever had. So it's really exciting.
Interesting. Those early days that you mentioned, it sounded like you were getting good feedback all the time in terms of, this is something we need, it just isn't quite right yet. Is that the case? Was that what sustained you through that time? I mean, how did you deal with those frustrations, I guess, of, we thought this was going to take a year and now we're in year 2.5 and still no business?
I think probably any sane person would have probably given up after year one or so. Luckily, I wasn't one of those. I've said to people before, that I think one of the things you need in order to be successful in business is you have to be irrationally confident. and I'd say I was probably one of those. I was confident that it would work, but irrationally so, because the signs were not there at the beginning. You just, it just was taking forever. And the laundry list of things that we needed to build was so long. And I just thought, well, we'll get this funded. I'm pretty sure we'll get this. We'll get the next round. We'll get the next round. And so we did, we had the patience. The early investors had the patience. They've, made a fortune at this point now, because they got in at a very early time at a very early price, and we've grown the stock so much. So it's my hat's off to them for having the patience with us to see it all the way through until we started generating revenue. But they are, it was definitely, I think, a combination of that exuberance and great investor patience.
Yeah. Well, it's always a good thing to have, and perseverance, I guess, pays off. And I'm guessing that there was enough good, clear customer feedback that was giving you that confidence, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I also, the track record that I had never failed before. I had about 20 years of successful, startups in my history. That gave them the confidence, but also we were just getting a lot of excitement from very large companies, companies like PwC and some of the largest telcos in the world and things like that, saying this would be amazing for us. And we knew that any one of those companies could be, 10 or 20 million a year at their full potential. With, if we rolled out all of our software to all of their people and they reached the full potential. And we knew that even at that, we'd be generating enormous return on investment for them. We have all kinds of stories where people have said that they've generated, multi-million-dollar deals just because they discovered some relationship that they didn't know that they had. And tons of stories of people saying that they improved their retention rate on their customers. They won RFPs that they wouldn't have won. The stories just keep stacking up. And we had a lot of those signals in the beginning. Our biggest hesitation on it really was, it became very obvious around 6 to 9 months in that in order to do it properly, the R&D effort would be enormous, getting the data right and getting the scoring right and getting all of the use cases built out, simplification. It's really an enormous effort. And from the outside, it looks very easy. It's like, hey, you'll comb through the mail servers and the communication servers, you pull them all into a database and there's all roses and rainbows. But it's very, very difficult to rationalize all the data, deduplicate the data, get everything right, figure out where people work at the moment, to score people properly, all these kinds of things. Rights and permissions, data residency laws, GDPR, it's enormous.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of complicating factors there, as well as not just dealing with the data and manipulating it or filtering it in a way that it actually makes sense, and then presenting it in a way that it's useful to people. But then you mentioned GDPR and privacy laws, and we've had some major issues here in Australia recently that have just highlighted all of that. So, yeah, there's lots of other complications that come into it.
That's right. One of the things that we did well, I think, is that very early on, we hired a privacy law expert on staff, because we felt like we wanted to we didn't want, there were companies that we knew, like competitors that we knew that at the time, that were not adhering to the laws. And they were saying, sometimes the Silicon Valley way, the laws will change to us,
Yeah.
But we didn't want to do it that way. We wanted to make sure that we adhered to all the laws, because we didn't want to make it complicated for our buyers. And we wanted to make sure that the customers really understood the laws. And so that made a big difference, I think, in our growth as well.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something there that I think is a really important value add for somebody like you, is to help your customers understand the laws and understand what they can do to protect their data and protect their systems from having the data compromised, because that like the two examples that have happened here have been a major disaster. I mean, one of them is a public healthcare company that's been on trading lockdown for a couple of weeks now, because their share price would just be absolutely destroyed because of what's happened. And they have tens of millions of customers that have had their data compromised, personal information or personal contact information, and so on.
That's right. Yeah, it's a big problem, and you see how a lot of systems are architected, like with unencrypted or even regular SaaS environments where all the data is in one place, and it's if somebody breaks in, they have everything. It's just it's really it's a shame, because people don't really understand sometimes how to protect their data, and all vendors kind of look alike. I think that the best way to do your homework is see who all the big customers use, and because the big customers do their homework. So if somebody has a lot of those giant customers that are privacy aware, they're secure, chances are they're using the best in the industry.
Yeah, great advice there. Look to those. I'm guessing also that you used your system Introhive right from the very early days to start building those relationships and understanding who had relationships with what companies and which people, and where the strong relationships were.
Yeah, we were Introhive's smallest customer, but it was enormously powerful for us, because we brought our board members onto the system, for example, our advisors onto the system, and some of our first large customers came from intros from our board members or from our advisors, places that they didn't even really think to check.
Yeah.
But then when we went into the system, we'd say, like, we're looking at banks, and we'd say, oh, it looks like, so-and-so has a great relationship at the C level at Scotiabank, or whatever it might be, right? And it was a really quick way in from a very high level. So that helped us a ton, helped us, jumpstart things, because in the B2B space, my feeling is, when you're selling to businesses, and you're selling to large businesses, especially, the smile and dial approach doesn't work. Those executives at very large companies are so well protected with administrative assistants and so on, and they're not looking for unsolicited phone calls or unsolicited emails.
That's right.
It's the chances of getting through that way is just so difficult.
Yeah, that just gets in their way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is fabulous, and I think the idea that it all comes back to personal relationships. I mean, you talked there about the big organizations, and but it is about reaching the right people and in a way that there is a personal relationship there. So It's not about starting off with, hey, I want to talk to you about this product or system I have that I think will help you. It's about the relationship so that you could get to that conversation because you've built a foundation beforehand, right? And that's where Introhive really helps to identify who has those relationships within a large organization.
Yeah, that's right. I think especially in a time like this, what we're finding from a lot of the customers that we speak to is that they're having difficulty reaching new customers, because in a recession, budgets are tight, budgets are fixed. Unless you know somebody, you're probably not getting past those budgets, and you're probably not getting past those firewalls sort of thing that are trying to block out new vendors. And so, being able to focus on retaining the customers you have by watching those relationships, focus on the people who move from one company to another, so that becomes an opportunity via a relationship, focusing on upsell and cross-sell into your existing customers. Those are all, very easy strategies that work in a recession. And I think that's when the recession lets up, then I think you can shift your effort a little bit more the other way. But for now, that's what we're recommending to all of our customers, and they seem to have great success with that.
Yeah, and I think the focus on those three things that you mentioned, that should be fundamental. That should be a core, as you say. Perhaps you can kind of spend a little bit more time on new customers when the economy improves, but certainly I would say somehow find a way to leverage your time better when the economy improves. But those core relationships, those three that you mentioned, I think are so core. And there's lots of businesses that just fundamentally get that wrong, quite aside from how they do it, whether they use your software or anything else. They just fundamentally don't have that principle.
That's right. Yeah, I would agree. I find that there's so much hype around things like outbound dialing products and automated email products and things like that I think the vendors have sort of convinced a lot of companies to put more focus on outbound, and outbound is a tough strategy sometimes, especially the more people that go on an outbound campaign, the more calls and emails that people are getting, and the more walls they put up, so
that's right. Yeah.
We see that. You can see it in the stats. There's, I can't remember the exact stat off the top of my head, but if you look it up, you'll see that in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a dramatic decrease on the effectiveness of outbound, whether it's phone or email. And you can see it in the number of touch points that it takes to reach somebody or get a positive response. There's all sorts of data out there. So it's pretty clear that, it can still work. You have to get everything right, and you have to, but it takes much, much longer. It's much, much more expensive, and that it's probably a dying strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I imagine combining a sound outbound strategy with the relationship part that you mentioned of those people that have recently moved to a new company, which is a potential client, but there is an existing relationship with that particular person and somebody or some people in our organization. And that's where the outbound, that could be a focused outbound. The firewalls aren't there with that person because they see, and again, whilst it's B2B, it's people doing business with people, isn't it?
That's right. There are outbound strategies that are way more effective. Things like what you mentioned on when somebody leaves a company or on, if you do referral campaigns. So reaching out to people that you have great relationships, get referrals from them, and then do outbound on those people and letting them know where that referral came from. There's all kinds of great ways, but if you don't leverage a relationship, outbound is really tough these days.
Yeah, well, that's a great message to kind of transition into our buzz round on. It's been a fabulous conversation, learning more about the system that you've built, and it sounds like it's going gangbusters, and particularly because of the principle behind it, which is focusing on the relationships. But yeah, the buzz round is our lightning round of 5 questions that I ask every guest, and the idea is you'll give us some insights from your experience that'll inspire our listener to do something awesome as a result today. You all set?
Sounds good.
All right. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I personally think in our industry, reading fiction books. I read an article one time about Elon Musk, getting a lot of his ideas from fiction books. I started doing the same thing. And I do have to say that an awful lot of innovation ideas come when you're, first of all, zoned out. You're not completely focused on the problem. You're distracted and you're reading something, but also just the ideas that come in, reading some of these books about things that happened in the future. A lot of this stuff you can bring to life.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, there's two things there that struck a chord with me. The first one is zoning out, and basically you're quietening down your mind that's focused on all the issues and problems and actions that you have to deal with all the time. So you're quietening that down, which lets some other things bubble up from the unconscious. But the other thing is those future novels. And I think, I'm wearing my smartwatch here, which I can make phone calls on and so on. And I think back to my childhood where we had Dick Tracy, I don't know, probably before your time, but Dick Tracy, who would do these things on the smartwatch, and it was total fantasy at that time. And here we are, probably 40 years later, and it's reality.
That's right, yeah.
All right, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Best thing, one of the best things I've ever done, I think, for developing new ideas was to keep track of them. So I've always had a book. So whenever I come up with a new idea, I write it down because oftentimes it'll be like right before I go to sleep, or when I first wake up, or at some time when I'm having a conversation with somebody, and I'll just always remember, write it down, and then you can go back to these things later. I think so many of the world's greatest ideas are just lost because people are distracted and they don't get it. Yeah.
And it comes up then later on, they see the idea turned into reality and they say, I thought of that years ago, but they never did anything with it. So how often do you review your little notebook?
Probably once every couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fascinating. And then something will leap out at you and spark another thought.
Yeah, it just kind of reminds you of all these like great ideas. Most of them you don't have time to execute on, at the moment until your next thing ends, and then you'll. But part of the way that I came up with Introhive was looking back through some old ideas, and it kind of connect the dots. Well, this new technology has now been invented that would enable this to happen easier. SaaS storage is now cheap, and a lot of these kinds of things. You're like, well, the timing wasn't right 10 years ago for that, but the timing is right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I've got a few examples like that where I've had ideas 10 years ago, and today there's a whole bunch of things that are now available that allow you to do that. So yeah,
that's right.
All right. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
Favorite resource? I think I get an awful lot of great information from Reddit. So I like going to Reddit and checking out the technology forums and the biotechnology forums and things like that, because it you get a lot of like science and kind of the latest in technology, and it kind of like sparks ideas.
Yeah, I must explore Reddit more. It sounds like you've identified some forums to follow and are more focused than what I sort of jump on and then I get a little bit lost. And it's for me, it's more like, in some ways like reading through social media. And I think this is it's not really good use of my time right now.
That's right. Yeah, it can definitely be a time waster. So you want to remove all the stuff that is not the normal homepage stuff, but I really like the science forums and biotech and all these sorts of things that I'm interested in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I'll have to explore that some more. All right. What's the best way to keep a project on track?
Best way to keep a project on track, I think is make somebody accountable, because I think oftentimes, you'll call a meeting and you talk about a project, but it's not really clear to everybody in the room, like who's neck is in the noose sort of thing, like who's actually going to be in trouble if it doesn't go on time. And oftentimes that's all it takes. As soon as somebody knows that they're responsible, they're happy to jump in and do it. But it's the ambiguity, I think, that kills projects oftentimes. So getting really clear on the Gantt chart, what are the lists of tasks? What is sort of contingent on, like, we can't start this task until this one completes. And then at that point, just making sure that there is somebody that is very clear on that this project is their responsibility and that each of those tasks belongs to a particular person with particular timelines. As long as you do all that, I feel like projects go very well.
Yeah. And of course, communication. So communication is key there, but getting those expectations really clear right up front.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. All right. And finally, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I think the number one thing they can do is decide how they want to be differentiated. Because one of the things that you see professionals do in pretty much every field, whether it's technology or entertainment or whatever, is sort of figure out what they want to achieve and what do they want to be known for. And when you do that, I think the differentiation becomes a lot easier. But without that, and I think the way that most people do it is they just sort of start working and hope for the best, but they haven't really made a long-term goal on how, like, what they're trying to achieve and how they're going to do it differently than everybody else. Yeah,
that's wonderful advice. It's about getting clarity again, isn't it? We talked about that a little bit in projects. The getting clear about what you want to be known for and what you want to be the best at. I was having a conversation with Roy Osing a while ago on the show, and he has this philosophy of being the only at something. So identifying that thing that really differentiates you. We're the only ones that bring together all this data and give you insights into who has relationships with who at different companies or something like that.
Yeah, I say one of the obviously when you've been doing technology startups for decades, I often have young people, sometimes fresh out of school, they'll say like, "Hey, I've got a startup idea. What do you think?" and stuff. And I'd say probably the most two common reasons or pieces of feedback I give them where I think it might not fare so well is, one, having a market size that's too small, or two, just not really having any clear differentiation. Like what is it about that makes it so that it can't be easily done by somebody else? And it turned out for Introhive, because it was such a hard technology problem, that becomes a big advantage for us.
Yeah.
And the fact that once we've signed up most of the world's largest companies, it makes it really difficult for competitors to come behind us as well, because they don't have the qualifications.
Yeah,
but that's differentiation, right?
Also, they've got to bring something else to the table, right? For companies to switch, and it's a big system to switch over if there's a big hurdle as well.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Jody. This has been fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about Introhive and maybe even get in touch and reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Yeah, sure. So you can look up Introhive at our website, introhive.com. So INTROHIVE. So intro like introductions, hive like beehive. Or you can reach me on Twitter it's just at Jody Glidden. So JODYGLIDDEN. Excellent.
And we'll post those links in the show notes, of course. Jody, what action would you like our listener to take away from our conversation today?
Any companies that are on the, say mid-size to large size, I'd encourage you guys to check out our website and reach out, and we'd be happy to show you what we do, or give you advice if we don't think we're the right fit. We're always happy to give you advice on that front as well, because what goes around comes around. People are always, you might be in a certain company now that's not a fit, but in the future maybe you will be.
Excellent. Yeah, and certainly I encourage people to definitely check out Introhive through the website, and if it's something that's of interest, get in touch with Jody and his team. And certainly the whole focus on the relationship aspect of doing business. I think that's a really strong point. And of course, the software and the platform behind that can obviously add a lot of value and make that a lot easier to track and to implement the strategies.
Yep, that sounds great. And yeah, it was a pleasure being on your show. So I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, well, one more question before we wrap up, Jody. Who else should I get on the show and why?
Who else should you get on the show and why? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that there's some interesting points of view from tech investors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think often they have a wide swath of stuff that they're looking at, and they see a lot of trends of like, you know, what kind of companies are succeeding and which ones are not, sort of by industry and with the stats. I think that's really, and then they also now, a lot of the larger ones have an ops team where they dive in and solve like go-to-market problems for their portfolio companies. And so yeah, somebody like that might be interesting to see as well. Excellent.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on those people. Maybe we need a bit of an Introhive for podcasting.
Yeah,
an opportunity. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today, Jody. I've really enjoyed learning the Introhive journey a little bit more and the philosophy behind it and what it can do. I'm convinced it really is something very powerful, and most big B2B companies should be taking a serious look at it, certainly the philosophy behind it at the very least. So thanks for sharing all of that with us today. All the best for the future and for Introhive's future, and please do stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.